Welcome back. It's Sarah from Roadworthy. Um, let's see. I apologize for not posting last week, but just stuff was going on, and frankly, I was just sort of emotionally drained. And the thought of like picking up the camera and getting myself together to film, it was like more than I could handle. Um, so, and I only finished one book last week, which is probably an indication. So I don't have like a lot of stuff to catch you up on. Um, this week is a little bit better, I will say. Um, the beginning of this week, I took a trip out with my husband and my in laws to see Reactor B at Hanford Nuclear Reservation, which was part of the Manhattan Project. Um, so there are three uh, Manhattan Project sites that are associated with the Park Service that you can visit. So Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, as well as Hanford. And I think all three sites you have to have an escorted tour because much of the property is still restricted access. So anyway, blah blah blah. So Hanford um, was built in 1943, and what they did at Hanford was create plutonium. So they took uranium and in the reactor through, you know, fission created plutonium, and that plutonium was sent down to Los Alamos and was used in the Trinity test bomb as well as the bomb um, that was used over Nagasaki. Um, so it just was interesting. So the tour was interesting. I will pop in some pictures of the reactor. Um, Interesting, um, just the whole thing, the reactor, the community where like 45,000 people worked was all built in 18 months. Um, just, it's sort of an incredible achievement. Um, And one of the things I loved in the reactor is I'll pop in a picture of all the hand painted signs. I just found them charming because you could see the pencil marks, of where, to line up the letters and anyway, I thought they were charming. Um, but I was pretty surprised at how wide open you could go in. So you got to really, and the displays were just really good at explaining how the whole thing worked. Um, the huge quantities of water from the Columbia River were pumped in to cool the reactor. So you get to see that whole reactor process, and then how they loaded the fuel rods, how they controlled the reaction, and what they did with the fuel rods when they came out of the reactor. Um, it was fascinating. So if you have an opportunity to go to any of the Manhattan Project sites, you definitely need to plan in advance, particularly for Los Alamos, because those tours fill up fast. Um, but definitely interesting and worth doing. A lot of the tour was around how they did it, sort of the scientific and technological achievement, and sort of the day to day work that went on there. Um, Not a super huge, that particular tour didn't have a super huge component of the communities that were displaced to create the Hanford Reservation. There is a separate tour for that. So I don't want to say it's ignored because it is addressed in a separate tour. So there were indigenous peoples as well as two very, very small farming communities that everybody had 30 days to get out and lose their homes, their farms, their communities. 30 days. Um, and then, two, there was not a lot about um, how people felt when they realized they were producing a nuclear weapon. um, once Nagasaki was bombed, um, how did the workers respond to that? How did they feel about that? That was not addressed. Um, the other thing that was explicitly, our docent said that will not be discussed on this tour was the cleanup efforts. So Hanford was separating plutonium for 25 years. There's a lot of nuclear waste, and it's just buried in the ground. And it's a Superfund site. So how that's being cleaned up, how it's not being cleaned up, what's being done to deal with that legacy. I think it's a little controversial. Therefore, that was not discussed on the tour. Anyway, super fascinating. And if you have an opportunity to go to any of the Manhattan Project sites, I think it's well worth doing. And um, I I would definitely like to go and go to the Oak Ridge site as well as Los Alamos. I think it'll be super fascinating. Anyway, what did I read? So last week when I didn't post, I had finished Summer by Edith Wharton. And just by happenstance, I finished this the day before, a couple days before, I can't remember, of when Sean posted his discussion video um, about this uh, with James, Julian, and Chris of the Book Cougars. Um, that was a fascinating conversation, and definitely Summer is Edith Wharton's 1917 novella. It's really not that long. And their conversation, it was, I think Sean's video is like 45-minute discussion of this book, which I thought was fascinating. Great conversation, things I agreed with, things I didn't agree with, things I hadn't thought of. So it was like perfect literary discussion, and I could have listened to them talk about this book for another hour easily. So Sean, if you're listening, take note. More. Um, so what is Summer? So this is about Charity Royal, and she is a young teen, and she is adopted by Mr. Royal. His wife had died fairly early on, but she was adopted when she was a baby from a community in the mountain. So the mountain is sort of this community of like bootleggers. I don't want to say outlaws, but they're definitely have this community that's on the fringe of society. They're pretty isolated, keep to themselves, poor, doing their own thing up there. And then, Charity lives in this small town, everybody knows everybody else's business. And Lucius comes to town. He's the college educated architect, and he's coming to this community to do a project exploring some of the older homes in the area. And of course, love story ensues. And a lot is about sort of the sexual awakening of Charity. But I think what's kind of shocking in this book, that was shocking at the time, was, you know, there's sex in this book, a discussion of abortion and unwanted pregnancy, um, and sort of the options that were available to women. You get married, and maybe that's a good choice, maybe that's not a good choice. You can get an abortion, which the abortionist nearby that is portrayed um, seems like a woman who's kind of taking advantage of these young girls because she can, right? She can sort of take them for all they're worth because they're desperate. Um, and or you can become a prostitute and hopefully earn enough to care for your baby. So that's really kind of what this book is looking at. And so it is, uh, you can understand why it was a sensation when it was published. I thought it was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. I loved the characters. I just loved Wharton's sort of kind of stark, realistic portrayal of like, what are the options here for women? I thought it was wonderful. If you've read it, check out the discussion video on Sean's channel if you haven't already. And I I have to say, so I read Ethan Frome in high school and hated it. Knowing that she's sort of one of the most revered American authors, I thought, I probably need to read Edith Wharton again, And so summer was a great way to dip in, and now I'm in. I will definitely read more Wharton, and I'm probably gonna have to reread Ethan Frome. I can hear my mother. She's gonna say I told you so, and anyway, that was summer. What else did I finish? Tali Girls. The Crows are at it. By Siamak Herawi, translated from the Farsi by Sara Khalili. This is a book about three girls in Afghanistan. So Tali is their village in a sort of rural, isolated valley in north central Afghanistan near Herat. But they're so I think at the opening of this book they're like 8, 9 years old, and what so you sort of see what happens to these three girls as they age, and it's not pleasant. Let me just say, yeah, it's not pleasant. You really see they're very poor, rural. You see how hard mothers work, how hard their fathers work, farming, herding sheep, um, just, you know, the snows, the colds, um, but how tight knit the community is. Um, and um, I don't want to say too much about what happens and really the plot of this novel because I do think it's best to sort of be experienced. But but I loved sort of the characterization of these girls. You know, really it's their struggles, recognizing what their future holds, um, and their attempts to escape. Um, you know, not wanting to be poor, not wanting to be beaten down by just that rural poverty, but also what happens when the Taliban comes into their valley. Um, you see sort of the greed and the corruption, and many of the men in the valley are forced to start farming opium. And so you start to see the impacts of that on their village and what happens when the Taliban comes to town. Um, and I loved the characterization of these girls, their mothers, their fathers. You know, it was rich. The language, it's simple. Someone described it on the back as poetic. I'm not sure I'd use the word poetic, but there is like a almost like a fable-like quality to how it's written. I really enjoyed the writing, but what I really appreciated in this book was you really get a sense for Afghani culture, which I know zero about. So lots of tea drinking, lots of um, sort of the customs and the culture around guests, family, um, you know, just, yeah, you just really got a sense of what that small town, small village life was like. Um, and it's a very, this area of Afghanistan is a very devout Muslim area. This is before the Taliban came in. But again, how the Taliban changed their practices. Um, I just I just really really loved the picture and the nuanced portrayal of sort of day-to-day life in Afghanistan. I really really enjoyed, and I could see, you know, the landscape, and I did have to go and look at pictures of the area. um, and it was beautiful, but in a very stark brown high desert way. Beautiful. Um, so definitely this is one I would pick up, but you do have to be prepared for some fairly horrific things to happen. Anyway, great book. Anyway, um, what else? These Days by Lucy Caldwell. This was, I don't, was it shortlisted for the Walter Scott Prize, which is a historical fiction prize in 2022, or did it win? I don't know. Um, but this is a book about the Nazi bombings of Belfast, which sadly I didn't even know that Belfast was bombed. Um, but it's sort of what happens to the Bell family. So it's really closely following two of their daughters, Audrey, who is engaged to be married to Richard, a physician in Belfast, and Emma, who is younger, who I think is like 17, 18 years old, and is training in to volunteer at like a first aid station in the city. Um, and mostly what happens to those two women over the course of this period in, the Bell family is sort of this well-to-do family. Their dad is a physician. They're respected members of the community. Um, so you get to see what happens. Um, their housekeeper, for example, or um, you know, that part of the book to me was the least interesting. Um, Emma has what feels like an insta love lesbian affair. And Audrey, you could see what's going to happen with her relationship from like a million miles away. And it wasn't very subtly done. But what is really good in this book, I will say, is the descriptions of the the Blitz, the devastation in Belfast, not necessarily of the landscape, but the people, the visiting the morgue, um, having loved ones be missing, children separated from parents, um, aid workers bringing limbs to the morgue. Because maybe that's all that was left, and maybe someone could identify that limb, you know. Just the trauma of that experience, I thought was really, really well done in this book. And I will say, I've read other books about, um, the Blitz in London, um, and I think this book does a better job at really portraying that psychological and emotional impact of that experience. Um, so that was really, really well done in this book, even though everything else I'd say was fairly mediocre. So a little bit of a mixed bag for this book. What am I currently reading? I still am kind of emotionally overloaded here in my own personal life, and so I'm keeping it light. So I started reading Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim, and I'm hoping that this is just sort of easy breezy and delightful. That's what I want. Easy breezy, delightful. And I'm also reading The Diviners by Margaret Laurence with Lindy of Magpie Reads and Maya from Maryland, Maya Mendoza. And we're almost halfway done with this book. Um, I wouldn't say this is easy breezy, lighthearted, but there's humor. It's kind of got all of it, There's the humor, there's the pain of coming of age, there's tragic events that occur, happy events that occur. It's got it all. Anyway, we're really having a good time with this, so that is wonderful. And also, just I needed a book like that. What else? I need to start a new audiobook, and I'm not quite sure what that's going to be. The library is still down. So Libby is back up, which is great. Um, so I can get audiobooks. I can go and check out books in person, but I can't. I manage my TBR through the library app, and I still don't have access to that. Don't have access to my account. So that's been a interesting twist to have that ongoing. I think that's it. Uh, yeah, I think that's it. Hope you all are doing well. Hope your library is up and functional, and hope you're reading some good things.